Somewhere in ancient Persia, a man is sewn inside two boats, fastened together, so only his head, hands, and feet remain exposed to the open air. He is fed honey first, then milk, forced into him again and again until his body can no longer refuse it. He does not die today or tomorrow. The insects arrive before death does, drawn to what his body can no longer contain, drawn to a man who cannot move, cannot cover himself, cannot do anything but wait. Historical accounts describe this taking as long as 17 days. This was not the cruelest punishment ancient humans invented. It was one of many, a single entry in a much longer record of exactly what the human body was made to pay when it broke the rules holding a society together. Most people assume punishment is a modern invention. Laws, prisons, courtrooms, the slow machinery of justice built by civilizations that came later. That assumption is wrong, and the record left behind proves it in disturbing detail. Punishment did not begin with law. It began with survival. Long before any code was carved into stone, small hunting and gathering bands, groups sometimes no larger than 30 or 40 people, were already enforcing their own unwritten punishments. Anthropologists studying surviving small-scale societies have documented practices ranging from public shaming around the fire to expulsion from the group entirely. A sentence that, without shared shelter or shared defense, often ended in death from exposure or predation within weeks. There was no judge in these groups. No written law, just collective memory and a shared understanding of what a person's presence was no longer welcome to receive. And then, as populations grew larger and denser, something changed. Punishment stopped being informal. It became recorded, standardized, and precise. Written down specifically so no one could later claim they hadn't known the cost. One of the oldest surviving examples comes from Babylon, nearly 4,000 years ago. The Code of Hammurabi carved its punishments directly into stone, so no one could claim ignorance. If a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder was put to death. If it killed the owner's son, the builder's own son was put to death instead. Not the guilty man, his child. The punishment didn't just take a life. It took a life that had done nothing wrong, specifically because it belonged to someone who had. Other laws in the same code were just as exact. A thief's hand could be removed for theft. A slave who struck a free man could lose an ear. A woman accused of certain offenses could be thrown into the river. Her innocence decided by whether she managed to survive the current. This wasn't chaos, it was precision. A legal system that had already calculated, centuries before Rome or Greece existed, exactly which body part a crime was worth. You already know what happened in the boats, but Persia was only one entry on a much longer list, and some of what came next was designed with just as much care. Rome had its own calculated cruelty, reserved for a very specific crime, killing a parent. The punishment was called poena, cullei, sewn into a leather sack together with a live dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey, then thrown into a river to drown alongside the animals. The choice of animals wasn't random. Roman writers described it as denying the guilty person even the dignity of dying alone, surrounded instead by creatures thought to represent chaos and betrayal. Rome had another punishment, reserved not for individuals, but for entire units of its own soldiers: decimation. If a legion broke and fled in battle, 1 in every 10 men was selected by lot and killed, not by an enemy, but by the very soldiers standing beside them. 9 men would live, 1 would not, and the 9 would be the ones who ended it. The Celts and Germanic tribes of early Europe relied less on execution and more on a punishment that modern minds sometimes underestimate: outlawry. A person could be formally declared outside the protection of law entirely. Once outlawed, anyone could kill them without consequence. No trial would follow. No relative could demand justice. The outlawed person simply existed in a state where their life had stopped counting. Archaeologists have found preserved bodies in the peat bogs of northern Europe, some over 2,000 years old, showing signs of ritual killing, strangulation, throat cutting, and being pinned beneath the bog itself. Researchers still debate whether these were executions, sacrifices, or both at once, the line between punishment and ritual blurring completely. Trial by ordeal shaped early medieval law across much of Europe. An accused person would carry a burning iron bar a fixed number of steps, or plunge an arm into boiling water to retrieve a stone. The wound would be bandaged and inspected days later. If it was healing cleanly, the accused was innocent. If it festered, they were guilty. Guilt or innocence decided by infection. Among early Germanic and Norse legal traditions, many crimes were settled through vergild, a fixed price placed on a human life. A free man's death cost his killer a specific sum. A woman's cost less. A servant's cost less still. It wasn't framed as injustice at the time. It was framed as order, a system precise enough that no family needed to guess what a death was worth, because the law had already priced it. Ancient Egypt reserved its most severe punishments for a very specific crime: robbing the tombs of the dead. Surviving court records describe convicted tomb robbers facing impalement, a punishment considered so severe it was meant to threaten not just the body, but the person's fate in the next life entirely. To a culture built around the idea of eternal existence after death, this wasn't only a punishment for this life, it was designed to follow them into the next one. Ancient China formalized its own version of exact calculated punishment through what became known as the 5 punishments: tattooing the face of a criminal so the crime could never be hidden, cutting off the nose, amputating one or both feet, castration, and for the most severe offenses, death, sometimes by dismemberment carried out slowly in stages, specifically so the sentence could be seen rather than simply carried out. Each punishment corresponded to a precise category of crime recorded in early legal texts. A person's body quite literally became a visible record of exactly which law they had broken, read at a glance by anyone who passed them in the street for the rest of their life. Across the Atlantic, in Mesoamerica, Aztec law imposed its own calculated severity, often exceeding what surrounding cultures allowed. Public drunkenness by a noble could be punished by death, while a commoner might only lose their hair or their home, status itself altering the price of the same offense. A judge who accepted a bribe could be executed alongside the person whose case they had corrupted. Spanish chroniclers who documented Aztec law after contact described a legal system built on the idea that leniency shown to the powerful would corrode the entire structure holding the empire together. The higher the status, the harsher the expected punishment, or the opposite pattern from what many assume about ancient hierarchies. What connects the Babylonian stone tablets, the Persian boats, the Roman sack, the Celtic outlaw, the frozen bodies pulled from northern bogs, the Egyptian tomb robber staked beneath the sand, the tattooed faces of early Chinese law, and the Aztec noble executed for his own drunkenness is not cruelty for its own sake, it's precision. Every one of these societies had already calculated in exact and specific terms what a broken law would cost a human body. They didn't need modern courts to reach this level of detail. They reached it first, carved into stone, written into law, remembered by entire villages who watched it happen. We tend to look at this and feel a quiet relief, a sense that we've moved far beyond it, that we're a different kind of human now. But look closely at what these punishments were actually solving. Trust, in a world with no prisons and no police, had to be enforced by the body itself because nothing else existed to enforce it. The tools have changed since then. The instinct to calculate exactly what a broken trust should cost has not. The man sewn inside those boats did not know his punishment would be written down, studied, and repeated for the next 2,000 years by people trying to understand what his body was made to pay for. He only knew that trusts had been broken and that somewhere, someone had already decided precisely what that was worth. 4,000 years later, we still have that record, carved in stone, buried in bogs, written into law codes that outlasted the empires that wrote them. Every one of these punishments survived exactly because it was designed to be remembered. And in that sense, they succeeded completely.